Hello, and welcome to Royale Without Cheese, our bi-weekly podcast in which we discuss both the classic and the unknown of art and popular cinema from the then and now. We are your hosts, me, Leonardo Miranda, and Miguel Aido.
Hello there.
Today we talk about Cairo Station, but before any ados, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, or simply give us a little like. Cairo Station, also called The Iron Gate, is a 1958 Egyptian crime drama directed by Youssef Chahine. The plot follows the dangerous obsession of a newspaper salesman with a pretty refreshment seller amidst a mysterious serial killer's killing spree through Cairo. Selected as the Egyptian entry for the best foreign film at the Academy Awards of the time, the film was not accepted as a nominee, but surely was embraced by new generations of international film lovers. Hailed as a masterpiece in the style of neorealist cinema and Shahine's most memorable film. However, did this Egyptian breakthrough into the 50s land of desire actually work for RWC? Well, to that we say, hold my coke, friendo, let's dive in, mate.
Yes, let's dive in. We should remind viewers that Tomás is not
It's not
available
here, not among us.
because he's got more important work to
No.
do.
Doesn't love us.
Yes, but Cairo Station. So this was a previously
time.
selected film of
Yeah.
us. I had already watched it at the time. I can't say at the time that I really enjoyed it, but I was also kind of sleepy at the time, didn't really give it the attention that it deserved. So I was glad to come back to it to see it, properly. And I did enjoy it this time. I think the first thing that occurred to me was, wow, this film has a lot of dialogue. It's like insane how much everything is sort of spoken and every interaction happens constantly. And yeah, I was impressed by how well everything works in that sense, that it's all kind of fluid, all the interactions, and it's not an easy thing to do, to have so many characters constantly speaking with each other and having this pace, this fast pace, being something kind of fluid throughout. So yeah, that impressed me. And the cinematography, the film is very beautiful. I think it's one of the stronger points as well. There are some things that I don't enjoy as much, but yeah, I'll talk about them later. So, what did you think?
Yeah, my first impressions are similar. I enjoyed it, but I'm not head over heels. It's an impressive film. I mean, I think it mixes a lot of ideas in terms of there's a bit of film noir, there's the neorealist aspect, there's even like towards the end the more horror film type imagery with the woman in the coffin. So I enjoyed it from that perspective. I don't know. I think the biggest challenge of the film for me was that, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but in terms of emotional connection to a character, there's not really anyone I can latch on to, because everyone, I mean, you can feel sympathy a little bit for everyone, and at the same time you can dislike everyone a little bit, which, I mean, makes sense. I mean, that's, people can be like that. I mean, the protagonist is a very obviously he has his troubles, but by the end he's a terrible person by what he's doing, and he's driven to madness. But at the same time, I don't know if I felt, I don't know, I didn't really feel like his driving into madness was super well built. I felt it was a bit, oh my god, I felt like maybe, for example, if the scene with him hitting the cat and being violent towards the cat had come before him killing the woman, and maybe that would have made a bit more sense in terms of narrative development, because you're seeing him go insane and like, oh, he's capable of hurting the cat, then he's capable of hurting another person. But the film is not conventional in that sense. It inverts it. First you see him commit the killing, and then let's show him go further into madness, which, I mean, it can work. I don't know if maybe on a rewatch that wouldn't bother me so much, but yeah, I felt,
One of the problems for me was we have such a sort of a vast array of characters. It would always be difficult to connect, properly with a sort of a main character, because we switch between them so often, and even though there's a sort of a main character with Kanawi, we still switch a lot from him, and because the story is purposefully trying to tell different narratives, different sort of little lines here and there, so we're not supposed to be fully sort of committed to Kanawi because there are also other things that are also being told. And so yeah, we're always sort of one step behind in terms of how strongly we can connect with Kanawi because yeah, our attention is divided. But I think more than that, the problem is that most of them are like anti-heroes,
Yeah.
sort of characters that seem to be heroes but have a lot of sort of questionable traits, and so you're constantly thinking, okay, I'm gonna connect with Kanawi because it's this sort of lowly, poor guy, and he seems to just want connections. But then he also does things that are very hard to explain, not hard to explain rationally, but hard to sort of empathize with. The way he does things like this descent into madness, even if it's not madness, but the way he just accepts that the best thing to do is to kill Hanuma, I think it's her name. Um, or the way sometimes he just lashes out and has these reactions where even though you understand that it's a person in a fragile state, it's hard to then empathize with him because he does things a bit too much on the edge, and other characters are the same. Even Hanuma, I mean, yeah, she's likable. She's also sort of I mean, we're kind of forgetting sometimes that these are all very poor characters, even
Yeah.
if she doesn't act like it, she is. So if we take that into consideration, I think that she's also someone that's trying to make a living, that she has a husband. We do empathize with her not wanting to be with Kanawi because on her perspective, yeah, he's kind of this sort of crazy guy that's kind of stalking her. But then she also has very disproportionate reactions towards him where she's unnecessarily mean, and so with every character there's always like a half of understanding them and empathizing with them, and another half where they just go bonkers and do stuff that is too much for a character to be sort of likable, and so yeah, there are not a lot of characters in this film that you can fully engage with or even like. And I think yeah, that to me was the main thing because you constantly switch between them, and but then when you focus on one you always regret the connection that you built with them because they end up sort of
Yeah.
subverting it and doing something that you think, okay, this is not a very good
Even
person.
that guy, Abu Siri. Initially, you seem okay. He's like the rational guy. He's gonna start a union. He's like
Yeah.
gonna workers' rights, all that. And then a little bit on, he's like arguing with Anuma, and then he starts beating her. And it's like, oh my god, man, what the hell?
Exactly.
I don't know. And then they go into that place, that barn, and then they're having
Mm.
sex. And it's like, what is going on here? It's very the way the relationships develop is strange. I know, like, there's also the cultural context, and it's the 50s, and it's, like, men don't treat women appropriately sometimes. I get that, but at the same time, I don't know. It's just sometimes it feels out of nowhere.
Yeah, yeah, I
It's more
agree.
that, and it feels like the film is trying to make a character likable, and then regrets it. And I know he's a piece of shit. He's like, oh, come
Oh,
on.
wait a minute, this film is neorealist, they have to
Yeah,
be shit.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but that scene, I thought, with them having sex and Kenawi is like standing outside listening. I thought it was orchestrated in an interesting way with him focusing on the wheels of the train going on the tracks and constantly and repeating that. And there's the loud sounds of the station. I feel like it does a good job. It doesn't show the sex, but it shows the effects that him listening to them is having on his psyche and further driving him to madness. I thought that was like one moment where the film really like sold his madness and the developing of his madness that I think probably could have been done a bit more often and with more a more gradual progression.
And I mean, and the film is very. I'm not sure what I think about this.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, it's just a sort of the directing choice. But the film is very theatrical, if you think about it, because it's very like old school cinema, like very early cinema, like 20s, where the characters are always sort of in front of the camera, facing it forwards. Really reminded me of this very early cinema. But it's like it's 1958. It shouldn't shouldn't have been that sort of reminiscent of that old cinema. And I thought that was I thought it was curious. I'm not entirely sure if I like the film being so sort of completely made in this way. Because sometimes I think it's condition it sort of puts a barrier on a bit of the blocking of certain scenes where because it's done in this way, things could have been a little bit more dynamic sometimes, and because of that they aren't. But at the same time, I enjoyed it because it's very sort of coherent, at least in the manner that it does that from beginning to end. It follows that rule constantly, and it's always nice to see something remind you of that sort of very early cinema where it's kind of like a play and the characters are always, always seeing them head on. But yeah, but the thought to me was this is a 1958 film. It's like seeing a film done this way now or in the 80s where it's a bit beyond that, and still it was done. Uh,
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, now that you mention it, it is more reminiscent of that. I think a lot of the dynamism doesn't come so much from the blocking, or it's a lot more in the editing. A lot more in the editing. You know, in the beginning, there's like these fast cuts of the station and with the trains and all that, which are it's a very reminiscent of the type of editing that you see in new wave films of that time. So it's a film that mixes a lot of different styles. I feel, as you were saying, there's
yeah,
that the early cinema vibe. There's also the neorealist, the social context, the poor characters, you know, on real locations. But then it's also film noirish with the serial killer and
yeah, yeah.
the care
And as you
the
said, the sort of horror vibe at the end,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Towards the end, reminds me more of a giallo or a slasher. Like even the
Hmm.
whole dynamic of uh, Kenawi trying to lure Anuma into his like his place into the warehouse, and then Anuma telling another woman, "Ah, can you go there for me?" It's like I feel like the slasher, the American slasher, also does a lot of that same thing. Of you know, it's a character is supposed to go somewhere, but then asks another person to go, and then that person gets murdered. Very reminiscent of that in Giallo because it's violence towards women, and the Giallo is also very much, you know, you see a lot of these images of women covered in blood, and I mean, even in slashers, like the Scream Queen is about that. So I did appreciate the film from that perspective of seeing like the roots of different things that were developing or had developed, or were still like a bit far away, but you can trace it back to films like these. So from that perspective, it's a very valuable film for sure.
Yeah, true, yeah. But yeah, you're right. I think it's very sort of sui generis film where
Yeah.
it's, suddenly at the end it's sort of very fictionalized all of a sudden without sort of the realism aspect where you have a traditional story and the guy chasing the girl, and suddenly seems like you have a normal fiction of
Yeah.
and the normal development of events. And yeah, it's interesting to see how many different things the film can be. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I think it's sometimes the fact that we are so into the future with regards to the film that, you always have so many more films in your minds to compare it to, and your sort of normalcy of films is the present day and the last years, and where, the standard of what is normal constantly changes. So it's interesting that when you see these films, you have so much in mind with regards to what cinema is that you can't help but to compare and say, this came from this came from that. For me, I think it's very plausible to say that at the time the film was very important and valuable, as you said, and groundbreaking. I do see that, but I think with time, these things always dissipate, and you see things very sort of rationally and objectively for what they are in the screen. And yeah, you're always a bit harsher in a sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, there's films that, they have their historical importance, and then with the passage of time they still maintain like a certain strength that doesn't dissipate with time. But then there's also other films that at the time were very important, but then as time passes, something about them, it's no longer, or to us, to our eyes, doesn't have the same impact. And
mhm.
so we look at them a bit more with, it's a recognition of importance, but we don't get hit by it the same way.
I mean, yeah, the fact that film is very historically based, it's always an indicator that that might happen.
Yeah, and also I don't know how developed Egyptian cinema was at the time. I don't have that knowledge at all, so I don't know. Like I don't have a way to put this film in context of its own national cinema. So I'm comparing it more to like French New Wave films or films in 1958 or neorealist films. Whereas, in comparison to those films, this film, like, you can compare them and it holds itself strongly, but it's definitely not as, for me, it's not as impactful. Maybe that's a bit unfair. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, but it's always something that can happen, I think,
Yeah,
because you can't know everything going into a film, and sometimes you don't want to because it also compromises a bit your mind into thinking, oh, I'm gonna see this, I'm gonna see that, I should be ready for this. I mean, to some degree, I think it's important, but not so much that you think you're gonna be, tainted with some ideas of what you should
yeah,
expect. So it should be a balance, I think. Um, but what I was gonna say is that beyond that, the film does objectively do things, I think, in a manner that makes it hard for you to connect. So even beyond the fact that it's so historically grounded, and that has a hold on how you see the film in the present day, there are a lot of aspects of it that we've discussed that really make a dent. And the main one, I think, was the characters and how they're developed in a manner that sometimes it's even a bit not realistic in how mean and how disproportionate their reactions are, which can be seen as a bit of a satire because we're talking about these poor people and these evil guys in society that take control of the poor. And you can always see it in that manner of the exaggeration of it. But at the same time, these actions happen across all the people, all the characters in the film, also the poor people. So if it was really about satire, I think it would have been more, focused on some characters and not all characters. Or maybe it's just the point of the film that all characters do things good in good ways and bad ways. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that it does make a mark negative, I think, that it does that so often.
yeah. And this may be unfair, but like, what is the lesson of the film? I feel like I leave the film not really knowing what
Mhm.
I don't know if that's the point, but like I haven't really gotten a message out of it, or a point. I'm not sure. Like, do we mistreat people like Kanawi and drive them into madness? I don't, like, if that's the
If
point.
you're poor, you're closer than ever
Yeah,
to madness. That's the
exactly.
loss.
And like in Kanawi, I don't know, it feels like the characters sometimes otherize him a lot and treat him as like, oh, this weirdo, for he's a cripple or whatever. And it's like, he's just limping a little. It's not that, nothing that strange. What happens? I don't know. It's hard to see like what is the purpose there of making him supposedly crippled, but not that crippled. I guess it's to say that people will just latch on into anything that makes you different and use it against you. But I don't
Mhm.
know. I don't know if the film does a great job of exploring any of these ideas.
In that in that aspect specifically that you said, I think yeah, it's that sort of exaggeration of things that are very small, and perhaps the director here didn't even care about it showing the actual limp. Just the fact that the other one noticed it just itself enough to show that mean people will always focus on
Mhm.
trivial things. And um yeah, I think in that regard, I think I do understand what he did there. You know, yeah, it's true. You didn't really have to notice the limp. What mattered is that other people noticed. I mean, yeah, the lesson. I think the lesson is that everyone, everyone is good and bad, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't
I do
know.
think that's more or less it. It's like everyone is capable of being terrible and good sometimes. And
And perhaps even more so in a context of poverty, where everything is like a jungle, and everyone is out for themselves, and so it's easier to change, your mindset and your empathy for your own gains. I think that's an interesting thing to make.
yeah, no, no. Yeah. I think you've convinced me. The film does have a point. The film does have a point for sure. I mean, on the topic of horror films, this is a complete detour, but I noticed you were watching Alien, rewatching some of them. I was
Yeah,
wondering.
yeah, I want to watch the new one. I should. I mean, if everything goes well, I'm gonna watch it with Maj because it's coming here.
Ah, okay, nice.
But yeah, I mean, I was gearing up for Romulus. Yeah, what I think about them. Here's the thing. The first one is like masterpiece. I love the first Alien. The second one is also pretty good, even though it does something completely different in terms of the approach. But I think it's a pretty solid film. Then you go to Fincher's. I don't know if you've watched the Fincher's Alien. I mean, it has that sort of background of being a chaotic production, and with rewrites and massive increases in the budget. I do think, and maybe it's on Fincher's talent and the performances, whatever. I do think it's not as that bad as they make it out to be. I think
Mhm.
it's pretty solid film. I mean, you don't really get the moments where things might have suffered from the budget. I mean, I think it's if of course we know we did, but it's at least well hidden. You do see it in sometimes the sort of the production design being sort of very restrained. You don't you don't see massive sets of massively produced sets, stuff like that. But other than that, I mean, I think it's a pretty solid film. It has good performances. I don't see the hate. I
Yeah.
don't get the massive hate, even though
Yeah.
it's weaker than the other ones. And I haven't watched the Alien Resurrection, the last one.
Yeah, that one I don't even know what that is, honestly.
Yeah, because supposedly she comes back to life, because at the end of the third, she kind of dies, and then they somehow bring back
Somehow she
Ripley.
comes back.
But I was also rewatching the prequels, and those ones, uh,
More
it's a bit more
shaky.
contentious, because
Yeah.
Prometheus, I do find it very fun, but it has a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And then Covenant, it's also fun, but it also has a lot of problems. I still think I enjoyed Prometheus more. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a big alien knower. I'm not too knowledgeable on the series. I mean, the first one is, as you said, is a masterpiece, incredible. I haven't watched the other three apparently, so it's the Cameron one, the Fincher one, and then Resurrection. Those ones I haven't watched. And then Prometheus I watched very long time ago. It didn't leave a strong impression on me. I thought it was. I mean, it had some great moments and great imagery with the way like those white guys, the way they look are very creepy,
Ah,
very
the
peculiar.
engineers.
The engineers, exactly. And then Covenant, I watched in when it came out in cinema. I haven't watched it, rewatched it since. I remember having fun. I mean, there's lots of deaths and graphic
Hmm.
moments, and was good to watch on the big screen, but it didn't have any lasting impact on me either. And I have watched the new one, Romulus, and it's, yeah, as you were saying, it's like it's fun, but with a lot of problems. And I think this one is also like that. But I see a lot of people complaining that the film, and here is my lack of knowledge on the series. A lot of people complain that Romulus has a lot of callbacks and a lot of references to the other films and all that. It just flew me by. I barely noticed it. So I from that perspective, it didn't even bother me. But a lot of people who like the films are like, that's unnecessary. Just make the film good. But I think it's fun. But it's, I think, when you compare it, any of these films to the original, it's always disappointing because the original is so perfect.
Yeah, it's unfair even to compare them
exactly.
because, part of what made the first good, it was that it was the first. It was so different from everything else and so restrained, and it's impossible to match up to that. Even if you do a very good film, like I think Aliens, the Cameron one is very good, but even that one, to be very good, it had to be completely different style. Like it's a more war action film. So, even within the Alien universe, to be very good, you need to do something different. And I think, um, if you just try to go for what the first one did, you're gonna fail. I think what made the second one good was, within this universe, I'm gonna try to do something different.
Yeah.
And that was a nice effort. Yeah, with Prometheus, I think it's like you really need to be fully within the universe to understand most of what is happening.
I imagine.
Because I remember watching it the first time and I didn't get a thing. Like it was
Yeah.
very confusing. And even now, I recognize that there are a lot of things I don't understand, even though I get more connections. But if you set that aside and just watch it for an adventure film, I think it's fun.
It's Mike's Alien Corner. I guess we'll do the sequel once you've watched with Tomás Alien Romulus. I mean, I'll leave just my thing about Romulus and Covenant 2 a bit, which is like, I feel like those films try to recreate the original, which is like this group of people coming together to face the unknown, face the alien. And always the massive thing that for me fails is that the original group in Alien, like there was such like a camaraderie between them. The actors were amazing, and the writing was great and all that, and so you felt such a life inside there in that spaceship. That in Covenant and in Romulus, like the fact that they're trying to do that, just immediately it's for me it's a downgrade, because this group of people doesn't interest me as much as the original ones.
Right.
But it's, as you were saying, it's like it's also it's unfair because Alien is one of the best films ever made. You're comparing any film to that film, any horror film to that film, immediately is unfair. But I feel like when you are trying to recreate it, you also set yourself up a little bit for disappointment in the audience.
Yeah, it's true. But at the same time, I mean, if you're gonna try to create anyone, it's that one.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I do think it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it's not great, it's not a great film, or I didn't love it, but because it is trying to recreate something that is like pretty solid, like I had a good time watching it, and it works. I get it, and it's fun. And that's all for today. If you'd like to reach out and suggest a film for the next episode, you can find us on the podcast official Instagram and Facebook pages. Feel free to subscribe, share this episode, or simply give us a little like or a big one. That's how our podcast can grow ever more groovy. And if you're on YouTube and want to see more videos like this, check out this next video right here. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.